Have you ever stopped and wondered how scientists actually study things that can't see or touch? I mean, really, how do you put a number on something like customer loyalty or a big idea like motivation? It seems kind of impossible, right? Well, that's the fundamental challenge we're going to tackle today, measuring the unmeasurable.
Look, some things are just simple. We can grab a scale to weigh an elephant or a tape measure for a table. No problem. These are objective, physical things. But then you have this other column. How in the world do you measure a person's motivation, or a customer's loyalty, or a child's self-esteem? These are the abstract ideas that are so important to understand, but they're just so much harder to pin down.
So that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If we can't use a ruler or a scale for these complex human experiences, what tools do we have? How do we turn these fuzzy, abstract ideas into cold, hard data that we can actually work with?
Well, there is a solution. It's an incredibly powerful technique that's used across pretty much every field of research. And it's the key that unlocks our ability to scientifically study the whole world of human feelings and attitudes.
And that technique is called operationalization. Now, I know it sounds a little technical, maybe even a bit intimidating, but the core idea is actually surprisingly simple. It's all about making the abstract concrete.
At its heart, operationalization is just the process of taking a big abstract idea, like motivation, and breaking it down into specific, observable, and measurable behaviors. The key thing to get here is that we're not actually measuring the concept itself, we're measuring its tangible footprints in the real world.
So how does this actually work? Well, it really just boils down to a simple three-step process. First, you start with your abstract concept, the big fuzzy idea. Then you break that down into its main components, which researchers call dimensions. And finally, you break those dimensions down even further into specific observable behaviors, which we call elements. Concept, dimensions, elements. That's the whole framework.
Here's a really easy way to think about it. You can't see thirst, right? It's an internal feeling. You can't measure it directly, but you can observe the behavior it produces, drinking water. So, by measuring the number of glasses of water someone drinks, you get a tangible, measurable indicator of their thirst. You've just operationalized the concept of thirst. Simple as that.
Okay, the thirst example is great. It makes a lot of sense, but how does this work for something way more complex? Let's dive into a case study on something much bigger, achievement motivation.
So I'm asking you, put on your researcher hat for a second. If you had to measure this, how would you even start? What are the observable behaviors, what are the glasses of water, for someone who is highly motivated to achieve? It's a pretty tricky puzzle.
Well, here's how some researchers tackled this. They started by breaking the concept down into these 5 broad dimensions. They said that a highly motivated person tends to be driven by their work, they find it hard to relax, they get impatient with inefficiency, they seek out moderately challenging tasks, and they actively look for feedback. Okay, so now we've got these 5 dimensions. But they're still a little bit abstract, you know? So the next step in the process is to get even more specific. Let's just zoom in on that very first one, driven by work, to see how this works.
So for this dimension, driven by work, you have to ask, what does that actually look like in the real world? Well, it looks like someone who perseveres through setbacks. It looks like someone who consistently works long hours. And it looks like someone who's reluctant to take time off. See, these are things you can actually observe and measure.
And this is where it all comes together. Those elements, those specific behaviors, get translated into actual survey questions. A question just like this one is directly trying to measure one of those observable behaviors. And by asking a whole series of questions like this, researchers can build a score and get a really reliable measurement of that big abstract concept we started with, achievement motivation.
Now, this whole technique is incredibly powerful, but there is one critical mistake people often make. And understanding this is really the key to mastering the concept.
Here's the deal. Operationalization is all about measuring the observable characteristics of the concept itself. It is absolutely not about measuring the consequences or the outcomes that might be related to it. So for motivation, you measure behaviors like how many hours a person works. You do not measure something like, was their project successful? Because success is a consequence of many, many factors, not just motivation.
This point is so critical. Think about it. Someone could be the most motivated person you've ever met, working late every night, persevering through every setback, but their project could still fail because of a bad economy or a competitor's surprise launch. If you only measured their success, you'd conclude they had low motivation, and you'd be completely wrong. You have to measure the behaviors of the concept, not its results.
So, let's pull back and recap the big picture. The real beauty of this whole process is how it takes something that just lives inside our heads and turns it into something we can study objectively and scientifically.
So, what are the big things you should take away from all this? First, just remember we're always measuring the attributes of things, not the things themselves. Second, operationalization is our secret weapon for turning abstract ideas into things we can actually measure. Third, that framework is super simple. Concept to dimensions to elements. And finally, this whole process is what allows us to apply scientific rigor to the complex, messy, and totally fascinating world of human experience.
And that leaves us with one final thought to take with you. Whether it's team morale at your office, or brand loyalty for your product, or even something like happiness in your own life, what's a big, abstract, and important idea that you, using this framework, could now try to measure?